The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Okay, everyone, we're going to get started on the webinar. So I thank you for coming today, and we're going to be moving quite fast over the next 40 minutes. And so the title of the webinar is How to Handle Objections and Stay Friends. And how did I come up with that title? Well, the tricky part with handling objections is that essentially you're explaining to your customer why they're wrong. And that's not an easy it's not an easy position to be in when you're making a sale. So uh, often what happens in handling objections is that one side says X and the other side says Y, and it can get sometimes heated, and sometimes egos get involved, and even if you've won the battle, sometimes you lose the war. So we're going to talk about some techniques today that will help you navigate your way through the treacherous waters, and that's hence the picture we chose here of handling objections. So just a couple housekeeping things. If you have any questions, please use the chat function in GoToWebinar. I'll be watching that. And if you have any questions that you want to ask during the webinar, feel free to punch them in, or you can wait till the end because I've put aside a few minutes at the end to handle any questions. So let's get started here. So the first thing we're going to talk about is what we mean by handling objections. So what we're talking about when we're handling objections is we mean opening the person's mind just enough so you can continue to sell. Of course, if a customer, prospective customer, brings up an objection and they say, "Well, I'd like to deal with you, but we had an issue with you a few years ago, and the quality wasn't where we wanted it to be," and you say something to the effect of, "Okay, well, thanks for inviting me in, and maybe we can deal with that in the future. But appreciate your feedback, and we'll see you later." Well, you're done at that point, of course. So the idea here is to get the customer to open up so that you can have a frank discussion about that issue or issues in some cases, and see if there may be some way to deal with it. And so how you handle objections, of course, can determine whether the sales process continues or ends. Now, one thing I want to make clear here is that good skills in this area will not fix poor selling up to that point. So often, as a sales trainer, I get asked to come in and work with the team. I'll get called either by the VP of sales or sales manager, and say, "Gee, I really would like you to come in and teach my people how to handle objections because they're getting killed out there. They're getting hit with this and this and this, and they just don't know how to deal with them." And often, once I start doing some research, go with some calls, take a look behind the curtain, what I often find is that handling objections is the least of their problems. Often, the bigger problem is that they've done a very poor job of selling up to that point. And what often is the case is that the customer has not been convinced that their issues can be solved by that company's product or services. And oftentimes, what happens is that the salesperson has done a very poor job of finding those problems, those challenges, those issues, those needs, those goals, those preferences of the customer, and then convincingly connect them to his or her company's unique advantages. So, of course, the salesperson is met with objections. They should be met with objections. And often, most often, the common one is price. Well, think about it. In the absence of anything to the contrary, a customer, being a rational human being, and that's maybe a bit of a stretch of using the term rational, but they should make their decision based on price if the salesperson has given them nothing else to base their price on, or sorry, base their decision on. So oftentimes, salespeople mess things up by doing a poor job on the front end, and then they often want some sort of secret sauce or magic bullet at the 11th hour in the selling process to help close a sale. And it can't be done. No matter how good you get at handling objections using the techniques that I'm going to share with you today, you will not be able to fix a bad selling process. Okay, so let's move on. So there is a six-step process, and I've shown a picture of a bomb here because if you don't do it properly, then the sale will blow up on you at this point. So I'm going to walk through 6 steps. First one is listen. Easier said than done. We're going to get into specifically what active listening is all about and how to listen in a way that, in manner that will allow you to move on to the other steps. Then we're going to analyze the objection. We're going to use supporting statements, which I'll share with you. I'll share with you an excellent one. We're going to clarify. I'll explain what we mean by that. We're going to do something called to respond and reframe. And that actually is getting into how to look at that objection from a different point of view so that it likely will make sense for the customer to go ahead. And then we're going to verify, a step which many people forget. So I do want to mention before we go any further as well that I've obviously taken lots and lots and lots of training myself over the years, and there are some poor training techniques out there now. Not too many of them, but some of you may have actually taken some training in the past on handling objections. And there are some techniques out there that I will not support, and I don't think you will either, because they're based on manipulative techniques and verbal trickery, and they have no place in professional selling. The techniques that I'm going to be sharing with you today are consistent with a consultative type selling approach, which, stripped to its very essentials, is finding people's problems and helping them solve them. So these are 100% high integrity techniques that I'm going to be sharing with you. Okay, we're going to start with a little bit of a poll question here, and so let me just open the polls. And the question is, what is your most common objection? Of course, I had to make some choices here, and I couldn't put every objection that you get in there. So I've used kind of general categories. So price, quality, service, delivery. One that's very common is don't have the budget or other. So I'm going to click the button here, and if you could punch in what you believe your most common objection is, and then we'll see how we're doing with the people on the webinar. So click your mouse there. You see people are pretty quick on their mice this morning. Okay, we still have a few people that haven't voted yet, so we'll give them a few more seconds. Some people are pondering. Which one do I get most commonly? Okay, so almost everybody's voted here. So I'm going to close it up and let's take a look and see what we have. Okay, so you can see you should be able to see on your screen now that no secret here. Price was number one. Now, second was don't have the budget. Now, people might say, well, not having the budget, well, isn't that the same as price? Well, not exactly. Um, Price is often an objection when you're comparing the purchase to other options out there. So, using me as an example, if I was selling a sales team development program, and the prospective customer said, "Well, I'd like to use you, Michael, but I've got two other quotes from other training companies, and your price is just too high." Well, that means that I'm higher than other options. However, don't have the budget doesn't necessarily mean it's a price issue, because it could be a value issue. And in my case, using me as an example again, I don't often go head to head with other training companies. It's often they don't do training, or they do training with my company. So not having the budget means that they don't see value in spending the money often at all. So they're not quite the same. Now, we had service and delivery in there. It's interesting that nobody said quality. Um, okay, so when you get into this, I want you to think about the objections that you get. And when you're talking price, um, I want you to keep in mind what I mentioned a couple minutes ago, that if you haven't given them really powerful reasons why you're worth more than potentially other organizations, then frankly, you deserve to get a price objection. So I want you to keep that in mind while we're going through this. Okay, so let's move on. So before we get into handling these steps, I threw this slide up here, and it's called Keep Your Cool. Sometimes when people have had some training on handling objections, it can be a disadvantage. And let me explain to you what I mean by that. I did. I remember one of the early companies I sold for. I think it was in my 20s. Um, they used very unscrupulous selling practices. So I think I worked there for a total of 4 days. But this manager, he was so proud of the fact that he had every objection that you could be met with written down, and this is how you handle it. And their salespeople were trained. Hey, you get this one, you use this. You get this one, use this. But in action, and I had to do some calls with other so-called salespeople. I wouldn't call them sales professionals, because they weren't. Um, but what happened is that person would get an objection, and in this case, it was often price, and they would almost cut the customer off mid-sentence and say, "Oh, I know how to handle that. Yeah. Well, Mr. Customer," and they'd jump in trying to handle it using the verbiage that they were taught, and they lost their cool. And there was one guy that actually did lose his cool in a sales presentation, and it was embarrassing. I was going along with him, and this story here is a true story of a company that I was dealing with that sells photocopiers. And it says I was in charge of buying new photocopiers for and this is from the customer's point of view. I invited vendors to come in, give a capabilities presentation. And what happened is that the customer had a concern. And I tell you, the salesperson just went to town. It was like they had been offended to a huge extent, and they got their back up, and it was almost like they were attacking the customer for raising that objection. And of course, it failed, and went back and talked to the customer, and this is how we got this this quote. Um, so when you're met with an objection, you've got to stay cool. Okay, this person has a concern. It doesn't mean that they don't like you doesn't mean that they think your company is a poor company. It simply means that they have a concern. And keep a level head. You're going to go through these steps, and I'll show you some techniques on how to keep the atmosphere nice and calm as well. Okay, so first step is listen. And again, easier said than done. Salespeople, by and large, don't do a great job of listening, and it's unfortunate because that is one of the key skills in persuading people to do anything is to listen very carefully. So there are some techniques in this listening step. Well, first off, make sure that you know the full and true objection. Make sure that it's absolutely clear. And a technique that I was taught years ago that I used actually just the other day with a potential customer who had an objection is you paraphrase it. And I personally like the verbiage, something like, well, let me make sure I understand what you're saying, Jim. I want to make sure I've captured it accurately. And you paraphrase it. It sounds like you're concerned about bubbity bubbity bub. And then you finish by saying, is that right? And you wait to see or wait to hear what comes back. And you make sure that you are 100% on top of what the objection is. Now, you might have to dig a bit further because there may be some things that they're not saying. So you may have to probe a little bit further and encourage them to share. And things like little verbal techniques like, well, thanks for sharing that. You know, I can appreciate where you're coming from. Things like that help the person open up even more. And we use these same techniques when we're talking to other people outside of business. Anybody who's got a teenager has probably needed to become an expert on handling objections and listening. Because we know that teenagers are not that great at listening, so we have to be extra good on our side. And this controls the emotional climate. Now, it's psychologists would say that this is a good technique too. Is getting people to vent, getting people your ear. This is all something when you're at your doctor's, they probably do the same. Oh, tell me more about this. Tell me more, and that causes you to think, hey, I'm being listened to here. Now, a salesperson listening carefully to a customer, that is not as common as I'd like it to be. So that's the first step. Listen very carefully. Next step is analyze. So when we're analyzing, we're going to ask ourselves, okay, well, is this valid? Now, in a situation where it's not valid, you're in pretty good shape because it often means that you can simply communicate the facts and explore a little bit more, and you can often, with some additional communication, solve that issue. The tricky part is when it is a valid concern. Let's say that they say something like, your price is higher than the other two quotes I've got, and that is the case. Well, that's slightly trickier. Or, I'm not satisfied that you can deliver on what you promised here. Something like that. Those are, of course, much trickier to deal with. But you're going to ask yourself, well, is this valid or not? Do they simply misunderstand the facts? Again, if they simply misunderstand the facts, you're in pretty good shape. That little bell should go off, though, if you're getting that on a regular basis because you've obviously missed something earlier on in the selling process if you get to this point and they still don't understand the facts. So you're going to analyze it. Now, the good thing is, going back to step one with the listening, by paraphrasing it, maybe getting the customer to reframe it in a different way or state the objection in a different way, it's going to give you time to think. And you're going to be doing your analyzing as they're restating their concern. Step three is support. So what we're talking about here is, again, something that's it's not done very often, and this is slightly tricky. Um, and this this is where you're going to agree with a grain of what they say. And let me just go back again to a little bit of psychology. When someone has just voiced their opinion on something, and I don't care whether you're talking about hockey or politics or buying and selling products and services, when someone has voiced their opinion, they are most attached to it immediately after voicing their opinion. So you'll see that in meetings all the time. Someone will say, "Well, I don't think we should do that." And someone will say, "Well, I think we should." And you'll see people defend their point of view, till the cows come home. And one way to disarm people is to agree with a grain of what they say. It doesn't mean you have to agree with it completely. So if they say, "Well, that's boy, that price it's just not worth it," you wouldn't say, "Well, you're right, it's not worth it." And let me give you an example of what I mean here. Here's what I'm talking about. Let's say that they say, "Well, wow, that's your price is pretty high." You might come back with something like, "Well, I can appreciate that you want to get the best value. Are you agreeing that your price is too high?" No, but you're agreeing with a portion, a little sliver of what they're saying. And what that does is that helps the person understand that, hey, you know what? I don't disagree with you completely. And that is going to help the person get the impression, and accurately so, that you do agree with them to an extent, and that's going to cause them to be less defensive in talking about this issue further. And this takes practice. It takes a lot of practice, and that's what we do in the live workshops. When we're doing this as a live workshop, we do this. This is a half-day workshop, and we flesh specific objections out, including the verbiage, and we practice all these steps. And it takes a lot of work to get good at this. It really does. I can share with you a couple of ideas today on the phone, on the webinar, but to get good at this takes a lot of time and effort. Okay, and so in this step, you're disarming them to some extent. So step 4, out of the 6 steps. Now it's interesting. We're at step 4, and I think you'll agree that most salespeople probably jump in when they're handling objections at step 4 or even step 5. So I just wrote if you check out my blog, you'll see that I just wrote an article about the first 3 steps of handling objections and how most people mess them up totally or miss them totally. They don't mess them up; they just miss them. Um, so we haven't even got to the step yet where most salespeople probably jump in trying handling objections. We're still at the clarifying stage. So what do we mean by clarifying? This is a beautiful thing, and I remember when I was taught this years ago. Um, when I first started, I thought, wow, that makes so much sense. This is also called a sharp angle. Some people may have heard this called a sharp angle. But what this means is that you're going to get agreement that this is the only objection and the only thing that's standing between them and doing business with you. Otherwise, you could get caught in this game. And the game is called who can who can make up objections and who can handle them until the other person's worn out. And it's a game that most salespeople end up losing. So customer brings up objection, you handle it, and then you say, okay, great, so you think you're done. And then the customer brings up another objection, you handle that one, and so on and so on and so on and so on. Well, what you want to do is get agreement at this stage that this is the one and only thing that is preventing them from buying. I can give you some verbiage here. So you've gone through the listening, you've analyzed it, you've paraphrased it back to them, right, to make sure that you've captured it accurately. You've done that supporting statement, and then you're going to say something like, now, Jim, is this the only thing that's preventing you from doing more business with us? And you're going to hear yes or no, or there are these other things too. So what you want to do is make sure you get all of those things out on the table, because you are going to have to deal with each and every one of them, of course. If you leave one of them hanging, then you're walking away from a sale most likely. So here's what it looks like in a little graphic. This, whatever the objection is why I don't do more business with your company. And you're going to see, so if we could fix that, would you be willing to do more business with us? And an alternate way of looking at that is, or phrasing it is, if you could address this issue to your satisfaction, would you be willing to go ahead? Now, you'd use that verbiage most likely in more of a transactional type sale, when you are selling product A, or having to get, for lack of a better term, get the deal done. If you're in a situation where you're servicing and selling to your customers on a regular basis, and say you're an account manager, you wouldn't use language like that. You might use, let's say that you're talking to a customer and they're giving you 25% share of wallet, they're giving the other 75% to two other competitors. You'd probably use language like, would we be able to do more business together, rather than this verbiage here. Okay, so now we're at step 5. And frankly, this is where most salespeople start handling objections. They usually jump in at this point. This is called the respond reframe. Now, there are different ways of doing this. There's one called the analogy reframe, and that's where you try to relate it to something that they've purchased in the past. So it would be, well, when you're buying a car, do you always buy the absolute cheapest car that's out there? It's commonly taught in my industry. I personally don't like it. It's maybe suitable in some situations and depending upon your relationship with the customer, but my own opinion is that it comes off as being cheesy, again, for lack of a better term. I believe the more logical, more rational, and more powerful way of doing the respond reframe is using the big picture reframe. And let me explain what that's all about. So the big picture reframe is essentially that, yes, this is for objections that are valid. So let's use, again, the most common one that everyone on the call here today gets, and that's price. Yes, our price is higher. It would be inaccurate for you to turn around and say, "Oh no, our price is not higher." So essentially, what you're doing is you're giving in and saying, "Yes, that is true." However, you're helping them look at the bigger picture, and you're going to get them off of price and move more over to value. And here's where you've got to offer proof, or a very tight explanation as to why you can provide better value. So in this case, you need to show how you can help solve their problems. And this is referring back to what I talked about at the beginning in when I was saying that you have to have your homework done, and you have to have done a good job at the front end of the sale. So the verbiage, I'm not saying you have to use this verbiage, but this gives you an idea. Well, Jim, we might not be the rock bottom in terms of cost all the time, but when you take into account your benefit and benefit and benefit, I think you'll find we're the best value. And you may need to explore those things. I've kept it pretty simple here. The problem that often occurs is that salespeople might not know this benefit and this benefit specific to that customer. So let me show you a little graph here that I think will help. So in this case, we are dealing with a valid objection. Your price. Hey, you're more expensive. Okay. Now, I'm hoping that there's no one on the call today who has a product or service that is always the lowest price. Because if you're out there selling a product that's always the lowest price, and it's you're in an industry that is where price sensitivity is high, then you're in a little bit of trouble. Why? Because your value as a salesperson has just been diminished to a great extent. So it's not it's so don't feel bad if you're getting hit with price objections, because that's where you're needed. We need salespeople to be able to communicate this stuff. We need salespeople to be able to communicate why someone should be willing to pay a premium for a premium product or service. Otherwise, customer could just do everything online. So don't feel bad about that. So if the customer has a valid objection here, we're going to help them see the big picture over here. And I've just put some common benefits here. And of course, in a real workshop, we would go through these specific to your industry, specific to your organization, and specific to the customer. So reduce turnover, protect investment, maximize productivity, save time and hassle, increase quality. So at this point, you're going to be in good shape only if you've done a great job of the sale up to that point. Because let me be clear, if you have not done a good job up to that point, this side of the equation is going to be empty. If, for instance, I'll use me as an example. And again, I don't often sell against other training companies. My competition is mostly people who is mostly doing training or not doing training. And so my more important role is to let people see the value in training their salespeople. Now, I know everyone on the phone today is going, well, of course, see the value. That's why you're on the phone today, and other salespeople are not, because you do see the value in getting more skilled. But so if I was hit with an objection, say, wow, I don't know if I want to spend that money. I don't think it's worth it. If I've done a good job of the selling process up to that point, I would know exactly what to fall back on, and I would pull out something like, well, Jim, you did mention that your people aren't prospecting as much as you'd like them to. Plus, you mentioned that you rated them as a 4 out of 10 in terms of skill in prospecting. And I think going back to some of the numbers that we threw around, you felt that if we could get them up to, say, an 8 or a 9 in those areas, that you'd be able to book probably another $1.5 million worth of business this year. Is that right? Yeah, I guess that's right. And you also mentioned that that your people aren't getting out in front of their customers and asking questions often enough, and they're really just having a social chat most of the time with their customers. Is that right? Yeah. And so if your people were taught and managed to the point where they were going out there and doing what you want to do, ask those questions, uncover issues, how much more business do you think you'd be able to generate? And after going through this, if I have this point and this point and this point and this point that the customer agreed earlier on in the selling process are areas that, if fixed, would mean tremendous value to them, then it's spending a certain amount of money on a program to improve their sales team it pales in comparison. But again, you have to have your homework done there. Now, you may say, well, what if the person does agree that all these things will help them, and they still have an objection? Well, it might be, and you want to flesh it out, it might be that they don't fully believe that you can do it. So in my case, Let's say, yeah, I agree that my people need to be prospecting more often. They need to be prospecting better. It could be that they don't believe that I can help them with that. So I would need to provide them unshakable, concrete evidence that I can do it. Testimonials, spec sheets, okay, case studies. And so with your business, you need to have concrete evidence as to how you can perform. Okay, so let's move on here. Last step is to verify. So what we're talking about here is simply asking, once you've handled that objection, whether the customer is satisfied that the issue has been addressed. And it doesn't happen very often. And I think it's because people are a little nervous to actually ask them. And you can frame it the way you want, but it could be something as simple as, now, do you agree that this is no longer an issue? Or it could be, Jim, feel free to be straight with me. Do you feel that issue has been addressed to your satisfaction? And it depends on the customer. It depends on your personality, your communication style, but you need to make sure that it's being dealt with, because if it hasn't been addressed to their satisfaction, then you got to go back and continue. You can't leave until it's dealt with. And if at that point it has been dealt with to their satisfaction, then it's 100% appropriate for you to ask for the order. Shall we? Great, Jim. Shall we go ahead? Okay, and I'm not going to get into how to ask for the orders, a myriad of ways of doing that, but you need to ask. If you don't ask, you don't get. So do not leave until you've asked for that. Okay, so we're going to open the polls again here, and this one is a little bit different. I am going to ask you a question on practice, because I've just gone through some techniques and we're almost ready to wrap it up for today. One of I guess the thing that drives me crazy about my business is when people hear a good idea and they don't do anything with it. This stuff, simply hearing these ideas does not mean that it will be implemented in the field. And I've just given you some broad concepts here, and these things work. They work extremely well. These are techniques that I have used with other companies. I've used myself. They're based on research. They're consistent with the best sales training companies around the world. So these techniques work, but you need to practice them. So I'm interested in hearing from you, how often in the last year, here it is, how many times in the last year has your team practiced handling objections? And I mean actually sitting in a room and pretending one person's a customer and working through how you're going to deal with it. So your options here are, oh, wow, we practice all the time. It's crazy. We go in every week and we're always doing these things. A few times, not very often. And last one would be practice. Who has time for practice? You crazy? So click your mouse there. Not a. The first two options are not looking like they're going to be winners in this poll. So you got 60% voted already. Let's give a few more seconds. Okay, so let's take a look here. So we have, nobody says practice all the time. Breaks my heart. But that's why this is a good business, because I've got to get in there and try to convince sales leaders that they need to practice this stuff on a regular basis, and convince salespeople that they need to practice all the time. It's interesting because when we use a sports analogy, like playing on a hockey team, Everyone said, "Oh, of course, you got to practice. You got to practice. We have practice every week." And okay, well, this is your career. How often do you practice to get better at your career? Huh. So 44% not very often, and 44% also practice. Who's time for that? So this is where I'm going to uh, try to convince you to take these techniques that I shared with you today and put them into practice. So here's what I recommend you do. I recommend that you choose a partner to practice with the next 7 days. Why? Well, because research shows that if you put knowledge into action within 7 days, your ability to retain that knowledge jumps dramatically. If you leave it for a month, it's not going to work as well. So I'd recommend you put in your agenda today, pick a partner that you're going to book a time with the next 7 days just to try to put the stuff into practice. And I'd recommend that you take one common objection. Take only one. Don't pick a pile of them, okay? Just pick one common objection. And I'd recommend that you book off an hour and you practice each step. And what you're going to find is that one of those steps in the first 4 is going to take a lot of time. The disarming part, okay, the part where you're going to be doing clarifying and doing that part where you agree with the grade of what they say, that part alone will probably eat up a good half hour because it's not something people are generally really good at. And then, so what you do is you do that for an hour and you will be significantly better than at the beginning of the hour. The next week, you practice again and you try to put all the steps together. So take that one objection, and the second week you're going to put all those steps together and see how it rolls. And then you're going to repeat in subsequent weeks. And it will take multiple sessions to get good at this. Again, when we do live workshops, we try to, we push people, we make sure that they don't leave the workshop until they've put this all together. But, we've only gone through some of the main techniques today, and you guys are going to have to do this on your own. Okay, so I'm going to ask you to do that. Okay, so questions. I'm going to want to get you guys out of here, but right now I'm going to open the lines for questions.
Hey,
So
Michael, it's Tom.
Tom McKenzie, I know you're on the line here. You still there?
Can you hear me?
Sorry, Tom, I'm not hearing you, so I don't know if there's a problem on your end there or not. But I'm going to have to cut you off because we seem to have a technical issue here. So, guys, I'm going to thank you for your time today, and everyone's got my email. I'll email these slides out to you afterwards. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me and email me any questions. And I wish you luck in putting this into practice out there in the field. And I emphasize again, don't just sit on the phone for 40 minutes and think that you're going to get to this. Get out there and grab somebody and practice. And I'm looking forward to chatting with you all in the future and hear how things have been working out. Thanks a lot again for your time. Bye-bye.